Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. This is the most recent part of CEAL's Healthy Longevity webinar series. Oh, oops. My name is Afrah. I am one of the program managers for the Intergenerational CallHub, and I am a recent graduate from SDSU's MSW program. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. We're going to be talking about loneliness and how we think our CallHub program can help. This project is something that my colleague Etta and I have been working on for almost a year now. We have a few different speakers who I'll be introducing along the way. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them down in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I want to ground this concept a little bit. I want you for a moment to think about someone who you know who is an older adult that might be struggling with feeling lonely. Think about what their day-to-day might look like or feel like. Try to keep them in your thoughts as we go through this presentation. The person that I'm thinking of lives very far from me, but they love sharing their wisdom and spending time with others. They have also experienced a lot of loss and isolation. They receive sparse visitations and often keep themselves entertained via television. Now, imagine if the person that you had in mind had someone who they talked to regularly, who every week they knew that someone would be there to hear about their stories, to celebrate their good moments and offer that support where it was needed. How impactful would that relationship be? If you had been lonely for some time, how much would you value that conversation? So just keeping this in mind, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Kaiser, who is going to tell us about the role Determined Health had in this process.
Excellent. Thank you, Afra. What a great start, and just such a pleasure working with you. So I'm Scott Kaiser, geriatrician and co-founder of Determined Health, a company we founded with a mission of transforming care. And my LinkedIn connections, speaking of connections, have been reminding me with little alerts that I'm celebrating 3 years on this journey. And as I look at folks attending today through the attendee list, I see that it's been a pleasure to share this journey with so many of you. And I look forward to partnering with more of you on the road ahead. Let's see, can I advance the slide or should I just say next slide? Perfect. So I'm very fortunate. I've got an awesome co-founding team at Determined Health. We're really all about care transformation. Catherine Steinberg, incredible care transformation specialist, and Charles Johnson. The thing I'll say about CJ, which I think is so important for all of us who are looking to make an impact in any realm of aging care, aging services, intergenerational care, et cetera. You know, CJ came from tech, big tech, and he felt like he could get another job where he was putting, help making people put more in their online basket, or he was even doing some online gaming, so getting them to bet their money, their hard-earned savings. And he felt like when he heard about what we're all about, that this was just an incredible opportunity to do something meaningful. And we really want him over on mission. And so he brings this great tech sense and capability that's second to none, but we want him over to our side. And I think we all have to do that with our organizations. We've got everybody can relate to challenges related to aging, and we need to tap into that and people's best motivations to be able to really make a difference. So my background, as I said, I'm a geriatrician, and I'd like to begin by introducing you to a patient of mine, much like what Afrah shared, somebody who experienced a lot of the things that Afrah was talking about, but we'll call her Rose. Rose really opened my eyes and shaped my perspective indelibly. She said something to me that forever changed the way I think about care. So Rose was, on the surface, everything with Rose was fine. She would show up early to her appointments. She would be chatting with everybody on the whole team. Very pleasant, always put together. But clearly we were missing something. She was not fine. Her health was declining. She kept ending up in the emergency department. So, I just didn't know what we were missing. All our screening tests were normal, and we'd ask her to say, I'm fine, but we were missing something. And so at the time, I was running innovation programs focused on improving health and well-being in a large retiree population. And we were piloting this new social call program. So I said, Rose, how would you be interested if we matched you with a friendly caller? And to be honest, she was hesitant at first, but then she said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I just think neither of us could have anticipated the profound effect that this would have. If we could go to the next slide. And it turns out that Rose was extremely lonely and isolated. In terms of her isolation, she could go days without talking to another person, hence the talkativity and with our team. She was lonely. She felt very alone. She was craving connection. She felt like she had nobody she could turn to. And sadly, Rose is far from alone in this experience. 25% of people over 65, 1/3 of all adults report consistent feelings of loneliness. It's even higher in certain groups like caregivers. And this has huge impacts. It cuts across cultures and generations, but has huge impacts on all aspects of our health and well-being, and even is a major driver of healthcare costs. It turns out that social connectivity, actually, if you could stay back with the other slide, and I know we're going to hear more from some of the other presenters about the impacts of loneliness, but I just want to share a little bit more about what my perspective from a geriatric medicine perspective. It turns out that loneliness is the key common denominator in a constellation of symptoms. So there was a great publication in the American Geriatric Society journal about where they looked at people's chronic pain, fatigue, and they saw there were these symptom clusters of loneliness, fatigue, chronic pain, insomnia, and these are very awful things to experience and very hard to deal with clinically. But again, the common thread being loneliness. And it also turns out that, when you look at, we're all interested in doing a better job of addressing social drivers or social determinants of health. And when you look at it, it turns out that not only is social isolation and loneliness a very common issue, but it is often coupled with other things: financial need, transportation need, food insecurity. So again, this kind of key upstream driver. And finally, it occurred to us that, you can't begin to address any of those needs if you haven't established some type of relationship and connection and trust. So it really is kind of like table stakes, the key upstream driver in our perspective. So if you keep going now to the next slide. So we built a technology platform to kind of make this whole thing possible, to be able to support social call programs at their core. And what we found was, like, this was not rocket science, not, there were so many different ways this could be done, just like you're going to hear a version today that, is relatively a very feasible opportunity to make a big difference. But there were all sorts of reasons related to HIPAA compliance and safety, security, where people were just not doing this. So we just made it easy to do the right thing. And so we built the technology to really support the safe and secure connectivity with the type of social call programs that I'm telling you about, that Rose was in, and that you'll hear about more today. And just made it easy to be able to foster connections between organizations. We have a fragmented care ecosystem. So how wonderful is it when CBOs and health plans and health systems can actually work together towards a common goal and be aligned. And then, of course, we really focused on accessibility because we wanted it to be as easy for Rose as just picking up the phone, right? She shouldn't have to have any app or device or Wi-Fi. Just pick up the phone and she's connected. But at the same time, under the hood, we're leveraging the cutting edge digital capability to really maximize the impact. We actually have a grant from AWS to put AI into it to do even more. And I'll tell you, we're not using AI to replace human-to-human connection. I guarantee you, I do not think that's the way to go. But that's for another talk. Okay, so if we could keep going here. So we do all sorts of different partnerships. Again, you're going to hear about an intergenerational CallHub program today that I think is just great, and I think it's the seed of something really phenomenal. And I'm so impressed by what you're going to hear, what I've heard from the students. It's just phenomenal. But we've thought a lot about how you can build a connectivity program like this and scale it, how you can integrate it back into care teams. So, another part of what we're able to do is where you've got a successful social call program is really scale it by getting more community organizations involved, more callers. Really, we've refined the whole outreach process. And then we're using the technology to be able to identify kind of other critical unmet needs and route that back to care teams. So if you could go to the next slide. And because that's what happens. So like Rose was matched with somebody who loved talking about old movies. She loved old movies. And even though they were just talking about old movies and that reduced her loneliness and isolation, all these other things came up around her food insecurity, around transportation needs, right? And so here we just have other examples where in other programs and along the way where this addressing loneliness and social isolation really has been the key gateway to improving social determinants of health and transforming care. If you go to the next slide. And, I'll just say again, in terms of what we're talking about today being really the seed of what's possible, we see this as sort of like flipping the care pyramid on its head. And, instead of starting with medical care, we're all about starting with this social connectivity layer, using that to supercharge care management, and then using that to deliver much better care that's collaborative, coordinated, community integrated. And what you're going to hear today really brings us a step closer to realizing that vision. Next slide. And with that, I'll just tell you, I'll come back to Rose because I told you that she said something that stuck with me forever. So, I'm sitting with Rose and she's really transformed. I mean, she's a new person. Her health is much better. She's not ending up in the emergency room. In fact, as I said, we found out she was food insecure. She's connected with a home delivered meal through her local Meals on Wheels delivery program. She's got transportations going to the senior center. I'll tell you, Rose even actually became a caller herself, not just a call recipient. And so I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my God, this is a different person. What happened? This can't just be from chatting about TMC and, old movies or Turner Classic movies and all, And so so I asked her and she said, well, yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with someone, but much more important, it's that she saw me when I felt so invisible that I couldn't even see myself. And she said, that saved my life. And that just opened my eyes. I mean, to think how this one connection could open the door to so many other valuable connections and benefits and really transform the way a person felt about herself and how she engaged in her health. And then I thought about all the other people out there, like Afrah was saying at the beginning, all the other people who are suffering in the shadows, who are unseen, who could really benefit from this type of connection. Just think how many of us could just benefit from some more healthy, supportive connection, to have a trusted partner in care. And so, that's what we're all about. And that's what you're going to hear today is how you can leverage students and the energy of so many people who want to be able to give back, who have all sorts of reasons that we can do the right thing and we can make it easy to do the right thing. And I think this, as I said, is just the seed of something that will be truly transformative over time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaiser, both for that information and also for grounding it in human experience. Now I'd like to introduce Etta to talk about our research.
Hi, everyone. My name is Etta, and I am one of the project managers for the Intergenerational CallHub. It is so wonderful to be here with you today, and I wanted to thank you again for joining us. This program has been a real labor of passion, and its success and impact has been so meaningful to me. I wanted to say thank you again to Dr. Kaiser for starting us off and for sharing his work. His research and commitment to the well-being of aging and older adults has been so wonderful to witness and to learn from. So to start off, we're going to jump in to a little bit of the background behind the project, the research, and what the project is and how our participants and society benefit from it. So loneliness is increasingly recognized as a devastating issue across the United States, particularly impacting older adults, so 60 and over. While many acknowledge that the common health risks associated with aging, such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and dementia, fewer consider the social impact on the health of aging and older adults. So in 2023, the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek, identified loneliness and isolation as a critical public health crisis. Previous studies have reported that loneliness has the same health impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's nearly a pack of cigarettes a day. This statistic is profound because as a nation, we are all really well versed on the health risks that smoking poses to individuals, especially aging and older adults. It's eye-opening to consider that people who experience loneliness and isolation are on par with the combined increase of general aging health risks and the impacts of loneliness. It's important more now than ever to find a community-based solution to support our aging and older adult populations. Loneliness in older adults. The United States is trending towards an older population, with California expecting a quarter of the population, so 10.8 million, to be classified as aging adults in 2030. The current infrastructure isn't adequately equipped to support the unique needs of this population. So in order to meet the needs of this population, we need to consider innovative solutions to combat the crisis that loneliness and isolation present to our society's older adults. So just to clarify, loneliness is the feeling of being alone, regardless of the amount of social contact. Social isolation, which you'll often hear me refer as isolation, is a lack of social connections. Social isolation can lead to loneliness in some people, while others can feel lonely without being socially isolated. So here's some statistics on how loneliness and social isolation are affecting older adults in America. 28% of older adults nationwide live alone, unlike some cultures where intergenerational housing is more common. In other countries, it's more common to have multi-generational households. In American societies, it's become less common, and we've seen an increase of older adults living in assisted living and nursing facilities. While these services are incredible, and I'm really grateful for them, they are often accompanied by additional challenges like the separation of the individual and family, and potential increases in isolation and loneliness. The next statistic, 1 in 3 adults feels lonely, and 1 in 4 adults is considered socially isolated. It's also important to note that immigrant and LGBTQIA+ individuals are likely to be at an even higher risk for this. And this third point, lonely adults are more likely to be depressed and have a pessimistic outlook on the future. Adults with supportive social connections are less likely to experience loneliness and isolation. Pessimism is linked to having low motivation to care for oneself and engage in meaningful activities. Pessimism, depression, and loneliness significantly increase risks to premature death. I also just wanted to talk about my experience of doing some of the intakes with the older adults in the CallHub program. I had the privilege of doing these intakes and getting to know them on a pretty in-depth level. And it was one thing to conceptualize their loneliness and then another to really hear it from them. Many had felt like they didn't matter because they'd been so isolated from their families and their communities, some not leaving their house for more than 10+ years due to being homebound. And many just felt like their lives were already over because they were isolated and didn't experience social interactions at all. And it really just cemented how important this program is, and it really does make a difference. Simple solutions. So recognizing the urgency of this crisis, the Center for Aging and Excellence in Longevity has partnered with Meals on Wheels out of San Diego and Determined Health to address the loneliness in San Diego's older adult population. Determined Health designed the innovative Connection First CallHub, which is how we monitor, track, and secure all data between callers and callees, and connects the older adults to the younger adults. Through this program, SDSU students and community volunteers engage in weekly social phone calls with the older adults, fostering meaningful connections and combating loneliness. Even a brief 15-minute phone call has been shown to significantly reduce feelings of loneliness among older adults, and Afrah will go over our data later to confirm this. And by building intergenerational bonds, we have the ability to create bridges of community and connection and reduce loneliness one call at a time. So the key goals: we would like to mitigate feelings of isolation among older adults and younger participants. The Call Hub is a simple and effective way to reduce loneliness and isolation in older adults. We'd also like to promote well-being. By enhancing emotional health through social engagement and reducing loneliness and isolation in older adults, we are prioritizing their well-being and health and potentially mitigating associated illness and premature death. And last but not least, we foster a sense of community. By building stronger intergenerational ties within communities, the connections just make sense. Younger adults benefit from their relationships to older adults the same way that older adults benefit from their relationships to younger adults. So how does it work? Regular calls, like I mentioned, a brief 15-minute phone call a week. The caller will reach out once a week during the callee's preferred time. We provide training through Meals on Wheels and through the Center for Aging and Excellence in Longevity. And we also are diligently screening volunteers, talking about the risks of fraud and making sure that our older adults are being protected at all costs. And then we also have resource support, so access to health and wellness through our partner, which was a really important piece because we wanted to make sure that these calls were able to be focused on the social aspect and not resource gathering. And so what are the benefits? Older adults experience increased social interaction. They have a phone call from a friend that they can look forward to weekly. I've had older adults tell me the benefit of this, having a connection that is not part of their care team or their family, and how vital that is and how much they learn from the younger generation. And they also get to experience emotional support and companionship. And the volunteers get experience in community service. This is a wonderful way to increase your likelihood of getting into grad school with your hands-on experience. And it also provides wonderful growth and development. We've had many volunteers report that they have not had any relationships with older adults in their lifetime because many folks don't have their grandparents around or just were completely separated from older generations. So overall, the Call Hub has been effective and wonderful and a worthwhile program, and I'm hopeful that it is able to be continue to be replicated across the nation. It has certainly changed my life, and I'm really grateful to have been a part of this program. Thank you so much for attending again.
Thank you so much to Etta for that wonderful breakdown on the severity of loneliness and on our program. Now I'm just going to take you through our process a little bit. Like Etta said, this has definitely been a labor of love, and it took a while before we got to the point of being able to make calls. Thanks to our collaboration with Determined Health, there were a few materials that we were able to use with little to no changes. And then there were the other parts, which we had to build from the ground up. So these flyers are an example of some of the materials that we created and continue to develop as we recruited. I think you can really see our growth through these flyers, and the main change that really propelled us forward was changing that wording in the headline to include grad school as our hook, rather than just saying volunteers needed. So once we went all over SDSU's campus with these and really focused on emailing them out, that got us off the ground running on the volunteer student side. We really love this project because the concept is simple and it's accessible, and because almost everyone has access to a phone. And at least for myself, I think there was a little bit of naivety in the sense that we thought that the program just needed exposure. And once people knew about it, of course they would sign up. And this was sort of true on the student side, but not so much on the older adult side. Although phone calls are great because of that accessibility, there were still some other barriers to connecting with older adults, which we were able to mitigate with our partnership through Meals on Wheels. That partnership is really what legitimized our program to the seniors, who are understandably suspicious of the random phone calls that they get. I mean, how many of us have stopped answering the phone just because of those spam calls, right? So once we had that factor, recruitment on the older adult side really flourished, and we were able to move on with doing intakes and matching. So we showed you the research, we've showed you our process, and now we can show you exactly how it went. The Intergenerational CallHub went live in late March, but our first successful connection was in April. In total, as of July 11th, there have been 58 attempts to connect, and 34 of those attempts were successful connections. This means that our older adults answered the phone about 58% of the time, and I think this is a really important point to think about. The other 42% of the time was just making the effort to reach out. Under usual circumstances, I think it's understandable to think, this person only answers the phone 6 out of the 10 times I've called them. Should I even keep trying to reach out? But what we heard from the older adults, especially if they were previously responsive and then dropped off for a bit, was that yes, you absolutely should keep reaching out, because a lack of response does not necessarily mean a lack of interest. So again, as of July 11th, we have almost 12 hours of call time, and that is great when you think about it. It's a collective 12 hours that we've spent fostering connections, which would not have otherwise happened. Our calls averaged out to about 20 minutes per call, and the research that we've seen has said that 15 minutes a week is what's needed to reduce loneliness scores, so we are meeting that threshold. And then you have this pie chart, which is a breakdown of our hours per month. As you can see, when the program started off in April, that is when we had the longest amount of time spent on the phone. And the call time did decrease as the semester went on. May is a particularly busy time for students because of, it being the last month of the semester, people have final exams, they're graduating. So it makes sense that the number had dropped a lot here. And then things picked up a little bit in June at 2.6 hours, but we did also have some people opt to take a break for the summer before returning when the semester starts again. And then we only have less of half of July so far, but July has been about 12% of the total calls, again, as of July 11th. And so we are expecting July to look similar to, if not to surpass June. And then keeping in mind evidence-based practice, in all of our research, it was extremely common to see the UCLA loneliness scale as the measure that studies used. So that is what we adopted as well, specifically the 3-item loneliness scale. Each of the 3 questions are rated on a 3-point scale, and they ask about companionship, about feeling left out, and feeling isolated. The answers can range from 3 to 9, and although that can seem like a really short questionnaire, it is that way intentionally so that it could be done over the phone easily. And then these were the scores that we were able to collect. We did have more matches, but these were the participants who were consistently engaged. As you can see, participant 1 did stay the same, but the rest of the loneliness scores did decrease. And according to the UCLA loneliness scale, the scores ranging from 3 to 5 are considered not lonely, and scores of 6 and above are considered lonely. So as you can see, the only score that did not go down was the only person who had started off in that not lonely category. This might mean that the call hub is especially important and meaningful to people who have higher loneliness scores. And although phone calls won't completely eradicate someone's loneliness, it can help bring it down to more of a baseline score, like it seems to have done here. We started off with scores ranging from 5 to 9 and ended up with a range of 5 to 6. So overall, we started off with an average loneliness score of 7.6 and went down to a 5.6. As you guys might remember, a score of 6 and above is categorized as lonely. So our group went on average from being lonely to not lonely based off of these scores. And that is something that we are really proud of. There are some things that we had to learn just through experience and through trial and error that we wanted to share. And so on the student side, we learned that students really value that remote volunteer experience, especially when the target is undergraduate students like it was for us. A lot of them are looking for volunteer experience, but they don't have the means of transportation, which can be really limiting, except for in the case of our program. So Etta and I also kept in touch with the volunteers by sending out check-in emails and also offering office hours in case a volunteer needed that support, and so they can get that kind of face-to-face contact with us. Additionally, we also got the most student responses when professors emailed out our information, which I think speaks to the importance of having that legitimacy in the community that you're reaching out to. And then on the older adult side, we really struggled with getting older adults engaged in the beginning. Part of that is because of a fear of scams. And that's why having that organization, Meals on Wheels, is helpful. It provides that legitimacy that the older adults can use to then have an easier time trusting us. And this might also indicate a need for education on the topic of phone scams. And additionally, some older adults also needed reminders and follow-ups in order to stay engaged. One pattern that we saw was older adults had some difficulty keeping track of who we were exactly. And that's because they get a lot of calls from different medical offices, from programs, salesmen, and some people just forget to follow up. So we definitely had to reassure some volunteers to keep trying their match, even if they hadn't answered a few times. And of course, whenever an older adult fell out of contact, Etta and I also made sure to get in touch as well. If you'll recall, about 42% of the calls our volunteers made were missed calls, but with the decrease in loneliness scores, even just that effort of continuing to try seems to have made a difference. Finally, I think something that would really improve our program in the next run would be to take down the students' loneliness scores as well, because the fact of the matter is that loneliness is an issue that impacts all ages. And for all we know, there could be a positive impact that the younger adults are experiencing that we just don't see yet. And then these are some of the comments that we've received, the orange being from volunteers and the blue ones being from our older adults. And we also have one of our amazing participants joining in order to speak about her experience. So I want to welcome Jocelyn.
Hi, Afrah.
Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you've been participating in our Call Hub since its launch. I do have a few questions about your experience. The first one was that we essentially tasked you with connecting with a stranger. What was that experience like?
Thank you, Afrah, for the opportunity to speak about my experience at the Intergenerational Call Hub. It really has been a fun experience. Like you said, I've been connected with my caller since March. And I will say that initially starting with the Call Hub, it was very intimidating. I don't mean to make this generational, but as a millennial, I definitely never use my phone for calling, right? I'm out here texting, sending emails, I'll leave you a voice message, but rarely do I call somebody. So I think when I first got started with this, one of the biggest barriers for me was like, just pick up the phone and call somebody. It was a little intimidating. But there was some training that you guys provided through CEAL that provided like prompting questions and ways to get started. So the first two calls I had with my participant were about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes. And once I went through some of those questions and prodded and got to know him a little bit better, the situation became a lot less intimidating. And now my caller is somebody I worry about, I think about, I care about. So this has become a lot less scary and a lot more meaningful to me. So no longer strangers, definitely friends, which I can appreciate now.
That's so great to hear. And then what is something that you learned from your match?
Well, obviously, I've learned that phone calls don't have to be scary, right? So that's been a huge takeaway. But I think one thing that's really been confirmed for me through this experience is the power of art and music to connect people. So for me, I'm huge into music. I love music. For me, it's a way of grounding myself. It's really, really important to me. And my caller just happens to be somebody that is very musically inclined. So he loves to go to karaoke. He used to be in a band. We have sort of hashed out that I'm more of a dancer. I stay away from the microphone. He's got the vocal skills. So, you know, while my caller and I are different in a lot of ways and may have a lot of different perspectives and views on things, we've had a really incredibly powerful connection over music. And he's also read me some of his poetry. So there's been this really beautiful exchange of music and art. For a while, we had a little trade of music situation going where at the end of our phone calls, he would assign me a band to go check out and I would assign him one and we'd circle back to that conversation the next week. When I first started this in the midst of grad school, I was like neck deep in work, had 300 jobs. I was really scattered and I had really sort of lost that connection with music. So connecting with my caller every week and being assigned this like meaningful homework was really huge to me. So I'm really have come to appreciate the power of music and art to sort of transcend generations and connect people.
Yeah, music really is a great connector across generations. My last question for you is, why do you think intergenerational relationships are important?
That's a great question, Afrah. And I think how I'll answer that is that I've been in the helping profession for over 10 years. And working in a hospital or working in a care setting, your perspective on what aging looks like can become very jaded. You're working with a lot of people with chronic illness, you're working with people that are unwell. And so how you start to think about aging can become sometimes dark. And one really big highlight of talking with my caller is I've seen his resilience. I've seen how vibrant he is, how much he has to talk about. I've just really appreciated that aspect, learning that aging doesn't have to be this dark situation. There can be a lot of happiness and joy that comes with getting older. So I think for me, despite knowing a lot about aging, there are still in the back of my mind some like ageist thoughts that roll around, and being able to connect with somebody that's older than me, that's outside of my family, has helped to sort of shift that narrative a little bit to something more positive. And then I also want to say, in addition to that, what you were touching on earlier about the perspective from the students and loneliness. During grad school, you have a lot of interactions with people, you go to class all the time. I was working a lot, but these weren't necessarily super meaningful interactions. I was in contact with a lot of people, but I don't know that I necessarily understood the level of loneliness I was experiencing. So for me, having this reminder on my Google Calendar each week to call my participant was something, because of our meaningful connection, I looked forward to, and I know helped for me to ease a little bit of the loneliness and isolation I was experiencing while I was so crazy busy with grad school.
That is such a wonderful insight. Thank you so much for sharing, Jocelyn. I especially love hearing that, you learned about the resilience of your match. Yeah, just thank you for taking the time to come on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Afrah, and thanks for all your work with this. It's been very meaningful.
Of course. All right, that is the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I also want to say thank you to our guest, Dr. Kaiser, and to Jocelyn Smith for joining us. And we hope you enjoyed learning about our program. If you'd like to reach out to CEAL or Etta and myself, please feel free to. Our emails are on the slide here. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again, and take care.
Thank you, Afrah. Thank you, Jocelyn. That was amazing. Thank you both.